Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, and I provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. I am a technology attorney who is passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, and professional and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. And here we are. We're back together again. We just did this last night for IAPP.
Yes, I'm vaguely remembering that from 8 short hours ago.
I just thought we'd have the mic set up again because it was so much fun. But today we're really excited because we have a very special guest.
We do. And who is our special guest?
Our special guest is Odia Kagan. She is a partner and chair of GDPR compliance and international privacy practice at Fox Rothschild, a U.S. national law firm. She has advised more than 200 companies of varying industries and sizes on compliance with GDPR, CCPA, and other U.S. data protection laws. And she holds not one, not two, but 3 law degrees and 5 bar admissions, plus 5 privacy certifications. We have a lot of letters in this introduction. Odia, it's a delight to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Excellent. So Justin, you're going to help us get started?
Sure. So, Odia, as we always start off with our guests, talk to us a little bit about how your career evolved into your current position.
So, I think it was in Lean In, right? That Sheryl Sandberg said, it's a jungle gym, not a ladder. So it's been a bit of a jungle gym and not a ladder in that, I started as, I've always actually wanted to be an attorney, right? The legend has it that I decided I'd want to be an attorney when I was 3 years old. And I actually never really wanted to be anything else. But it took me a little bit of figuring out that, privacy was, the spark joy in my heart kind of specialty. I started out doing corporate commercial stuff. I did some M&A. I did a lot of tech stuff and I'm Israeli. I started my career in Israel. And so I did a lot of tech, digital, international stuff. And then, kind of gravitated back into, the tech led back to the privacy. And so I've been focused on that for a good number of years. And I think that, there is merit to the jungle gym. I think that a broad-based knowledge is really helpful for attorneys to be good at what they do because, even if you don't know the answer, you know what you don't know and you can field it. Also, having said that, I think you don't need to set out to do a jungle gym. And if you can this is really what I want to do, go for the ladder, don't do it that way. But it's worked out well for me.
I think it's so interesting now that privacy is even a field that you can actually concentrate and major in. It wasn't when I was in school, there was no privacy class even or topic or consideration. Now that it can be an entire dedicated field with a degree, I think is really neat.
Agreed.
Now, let's move on to one of Justin's favorite topics. Try not to jump up and down when we move on to autonomous vehicles.
I think you should pose the next question then.
Well, I will, but I want you to curb the excitement because I know how excited you are about autonomous vehicles. But there is a big evolution of new technologies like autonomous vehicles, among others. And so, how do you see data collection and privacy evolving in this area?
Well, I think that the obvious thing with autonomous vehicles and similar technologies is that there is a lot more data that is being collected and shared and processed. And some of it, is not apparent, and some of it people aren't yet aware of, right? But it's there. There's a lot of data. Cars, collect and process and share a lot of data. A chunk of that data is personal data. It actually also there's, the definitions in Europe of personal data and under CCPA, personal information, and, tied to a device and et cetera, right? But at least there's a considerable amount of that data that is personal and therefore subject to data protection laws. And so basically a lot more data, and that data needs to be used in a way that's compliant, which that lends itself to, so far, that sounds simple, right? But it's the simple, I've kind of mentioned this dichotomy before. The fact that it's simple doesn't make it easy, right? So you have this data and you have a transparency requirement. So you need to make it known to people in a way that people understand what is the data and where is it coming from and what are you doing with it and who are you sharing it with? And, we've seen enforcement actions, most recently, right, the WhatsApp case in Europe and the California Attorney General enforcement report that put the emphasis on transparency and clarity and saying things in ways that people understand. And that's not easy when you have a lot of different, systems in the car that are collecting data. Number two, a lot of stakeholders. So you have the manufacturer, but you also have, and obviously you have the driver and you have a passenger and you have another passenger, or maybe you have another driver and you have like a pedestrian and things like that, right? On top of that, you also have third-party providers, especially as cars are getting more complex in incorporating, Android Auto and Android environment, incorporating infotainment system, incorporating third-party applications. So there's a lot of stakeholders, and making the transparency, right? Making it apparent what data is collected and how and why and how is it shared. And layering on top of that, the data protection requirements for control or consent, right? Like in Europe, you need consent in connection with the car because it's been determined to be terminal equipment. So you need consent, just like with cookies. In CCPA, you have the concept of sale for certain transfers, and how do you operationalize the opt-in or the opt-out? And how do you do the contracts? What are the relationships between them? Because, are they service providers and you need agreements? So I think the short answer is a lot more data, plus a lot of data protection laws, and then you need to operationalize all that.
Well, that is a lot for people to be able to digest as just an individual, right? What am I opting into? What am I opting out of? What am I consenting? Are there any that you see that are doing this well?
I think that I think that a lot of companies are working on it. I think that this concept of, first of all, this concept of trying to translate that into something specific and understandable is kind of I'm not going to say a moving target, but I think that the threshold for what meets with the expectations of transparency are high, and it's clear that they are high. Let's go with that, right? I don't want to say like, oh, we didn't know about this, because we had the transparency report from the Article 29 Working Party for a good number of years, but this wasn't a common practice. I think that one other thing that I can add to my answer is that I think besides the extra effort that needs to go into it, the data the mapping of the data, understanding the mapping of the data, understanding the functions and spelling it out. Also, there is, I think, importance for design, legal design, customer experience, user experience, trying to, figure out kind of new ways to present things, especially when you have, small screen interfaces in the car or voice activated interfaces. I've seen a lot of good efforts, and I think that there is, a lot of work that everybody still needs to do as this progresses.
So kind of as a follow-up on your idea about things being a bit of a moving target and how we operationalize all this, as we all know, we don't have a federal privacy law, but how do you think privacy will evolve when we have vehicle sensors and then the wireless communication? That's really an FCC issue. The safety of the vehicles is the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. And then we've got CCPA, which is some state privacy law. Don't really have anything on the federal level. To your point, how do we start to integrate these varying regulations where you have privacy and security as part of it, but not the only part, that you have to put all these puzzle pieces together?
Yeah, and I'd probably add, like, if you have the financing of the vehicle piece, then maybe you have the CFPB, and if you have insurance companies, then maybe you have insurance specific. Like, it really depends on where the data is going. I think the one thing that the place where I hope it would go is, I really hope that the various authorities, agencies that are responsible for pieces of it will work together when putting forth regulation. We've seen similar, issues or problems, or, on the interplay, for example, in a different area, but like the interplay between AML, AML CFT regulations and the data protection laws, right, in Europe. So you have like a packet of AML, regulations proposed, and the data protection bodies, now the European Data Protection Supervisor and the European Data Protection Board, have both said, hey, this doesn't match, this and this and this and this are missing. You need to work on it. And I think that it would be a good idea for cross-agency collaboration on these, not necessarily even in the, putting forth a new regulation, and basically kind of either like a guidance or clarification or whatever on how this needs to work together, and also in the operation of each agency, right? Like, if the agencies that are responsible for safety or security, right, when they put forth things, they need to consult with the privacy regulators to figure out that what they're doing matches the privacy side. When you have a privacy specific regulation, or again, like road safety, and that requires the collection or the exchange of information, that needs to also match up with privacy and security considerations. So I think, like, working together, it would be the ideal that I'm hoping we will have.
So, like all families, everyone talks about who owns the data while you're having a family drive. And it was just a couple weeks ago that we bought a new car, and we started talking about location information, and the car knew where we were, and our phones knew where we were. And our daughter said, well, I don't really want them to know where we are. And we started on this whole fascinating discussion of who owns the data. So in your mind, when you're working with companies, who do you think owns the data? We have the manufacturer, we have the dealer, we have me, the individual. And then as a driver, as an individual owner of a car, what should I be concerned about as it relates to my data?
I just want to say that our, car conversations are always who gets the switch and who gets the iPad. And it's my turn. No, it's my turn. No, it's my turn. So
they don't get to switch. They're just still stuck in the back. And they don't get the switchingness yet. Maybe when they're older.
So I think so. First of all, ownership of the data is an interesting concept that I think, I see it a lot, and I see it in contracts. And I know that, I've seen it, and Justin, you probably have seen it a lot in contracts too. I think data protection laws are kind of not as concerned with ownership, but rather sort of more kind of rights and choice and control. I think that all the data protection laws agree that, it's the person's data. It's the person has rights in the data. Okay. So that's the beginning. Now the question is, who else, gets a piece of the data and the rights to do what with the data, and like the interplay between that. And I think so that's really kind of, and I've seen this discussion in the cookie context, right? Like zero party data, because it's my party. I'm the person, and that's my data. I think so. The data is the person's. What should the person be concerned with, and what should the other stakeholders be concerned with? I mean, again, I've said it before, but I think the first thing, and this is kind of more maybe US based approach, but my first priority would be, as a user and as a, consumer facing stakeholder in the mobility space, be it the OEM or, one of the infotainment providers or payment provider or whomever, is that the individual understands what data is being collected and why, and where is it going after, right? So I have the full picture. I think that's the first priority, because I think that to a great extent, if I know what's going on, that will help me make an educated decision. Now, is that the full picture? I think even in the US, that's not the full picture. Definitely in Europe, the approach is, okay, it's not enough for you to say yes or no. We need to have a layer before that says, is this like just or necessary or ethical in the first place for the company to even be collecting this information? And I think that there is room for that. And that I think we will see. Not only do I think there's room for that, CPRA and the Virginia law and the Colorado law now have this kind of, necessary, fair and proportionate, or necessary and proportionate analysis that you need to make ex ante in processing information. So it's not like a free for all. Like you can't just collect everything and kind of hope for the best. So I think there is a component in that. And that's, I think, where, regulators will weigh in on what are the parameters for what are the limits for data collected. And then of the data collected, how much choice do I need to give individuals? There is a beginning, there's a foundation of that, the automotive innovators, right? They, the association, there are the privacy, there's this privacy guidelines for the North American manufacturers that has these concepts of transparency and control and the scope of control. And I think that, we hopefully will see clarity on that for the US, as well as for Europe. I think more clarity would be helpful for everybody.
Indeed. I think there's a lot of confusion nowadays everywhere.
Yes, I'm sometimes confused in my own house about where to put the trash.
You're very confused over where to put the trash every week. Same thing. Well, so switching gears a little bit, let's move to the marketing side of your specialties. And, how are companies changing marketing tactics in reaction to what's happening in the universe right now? We have technology companies who are saying no to cookies. You mentioned zero-party data, which I'd love if you could explain zero-party data, because I think that's a new phrase that not everyone is using. So we'd just love your thoughts kind of overall on where we are in the universe and how companies are reacting from a marketing standpoint, maybe a little bit how we got here.
Well, so the how we got here is Google had this, plan to deprecate third-party cookies. And that plan was in the works, and companies were reacting to that plan. And that plan has now been postponed, giving, a little bit of a, respite to companies and more time to prepare. What does this mean? I think, so the third-party cookie situation is part of kind of a more, bigger concept of, that's been dubbed by, people that don't like it, I guess, mainly surveillance advertising, right? Or, the concept of, advertising, which is based on very kind of targeted, granular information that is gathered from activity across devices and matching, et cetera. And there's a whole infrastructure in place that exchanges huge amounts of information in real time, in like a fraction of a second between, thousands of companies. So that's sort of the backdrop. And there is ongoing kind of enforcement and litigation in the EU about it. There's an investigation in the UK, on this whole industry. But basically, so that's the backdrop. And the issue is, okay, so if third-party cookies go away, and third-party cookies are a way for a company to leverage tools of other companies in order to analyze and monetize and their own data and generate leads, et cetera. If you and so leveraging, if you can't do that anymore, okay, then what can you do? So what you can do is you can use quote unquote your own data. So what does your own data mean? It means data that you get directly from individuals. And so that has been called first party data, even though it's not really first party, right? Because the first party is me, the person. And then the sort of second party is the entity that I'm directly sending it to. So that's why there's this term zero party and first party. But basically it's you have a direct relationship with the individual. So if you have a direct relationship with the individual, great. Okay. By the way, great is parentheses, great, but you still are subject to all the privacy laws, right? You need transparency. If you're sharing the information, you also need to think about the sharing. But so that's kind of one aspect is trying to move to this direct relationship. That, as I said, one doesn't alleviate completely the privacy issues, maybe simplifies them, but it's still, an amount of work. The other issue that's the challenge with this is that companies have turned to third-party cookies and third-party, tools, et cetera, not only because they were available and they really like the targeting concept, but also from economics, right? Usually smaller companies need to rely on third parties. And so there's also now, if you're a small company and you want to rely on your own audience, well, how do you develop that audience, right? People go to, if you can, then you have channels, you have YouTube, you have Instagram, you have, things that you try to generate leads and create your own audience. That's one option. Very much more difficult for smaller companies, very difficult for companies that aren't consumer facing by their nature. And then you supplement that with kind of, collaborating on your, with your information. So I've got my little, 100, followers or whatever, and you have your own, your 100, and then we're going to collaborate. And then, you again have the sharing, and the sharing needs to be accounted for privacy. So I think what are companies doing? Companies are trying to figure out ways that don't rely on third-party cookies for their deployment. Some of them still involve a lot of personal information, especially both the collection and the sharing. And then the other direction is trying to do marketing and advertising that isn't based on personal information. For example, contextual advertising. That's another direction.
I find it so interesting. It feels like we're going back to contextual advertising because we started there, and then here's all these great tools to help you make it more tailored. And now we're going back in this other direction. So it'll be very interesting to see how I think all this shakes out.
So a lot of what's motivating all of this interest in privacy compliance is enforcement, and would love to get your thoughts about the initial enforcement efforts to date with CCPA, and what do you think that might mean for CPRA that's coming down the road?
So I think, first of all, as I mentioned, right, there was a report that was issued by the California Attorney General for a year of enforcement. And the report is sort of an anonymized version of actual non-compliance proceedings that the Attorney General initiated with companies. The takeaways that I have from it, number one, I very much appreciated the transparency, and I think we need more of that and more guidance, and hopefully that's forthcoming from the California Privacy Protection Authority that is kind of forming and got appointed the executive director a few days ago. I think the key points in there, first of all, it was very granular. Right. There were very specific pieces. It wasn't just big picture, egregious kind of breaches. There were very specific granular things, which is important to note. There was a big focus on do not sell, the do not sell link, the analysis of sale, the operationalizing of the opt-out, and consumer requests. So that's important. And the other piece that I saw that was important is that there was a focus on transparency. you didn't include the rights, you didn't include the right processes, you didn't disclose the third party sharing. It was very, it was basically, guys, like how you draft your privacy notice. This is important. And I've been telling clients that, and I think this is kind of, reinforces that point here in the US. And I mentioned the WhatsApp case, which really highlights, the whole case revolves around transparency and how to draft privacy notices, and the 9-digit fine consequences of privacy notices being not clear. So I think the combination of those things, especially since CPRA, and you asked about CPRA, I think CPRA and the other laws, right? CDPA, CPA, they borrow a lot of concepts from GDPR. They borrow them sometimes verbatim, right? Like the definition of consent is literally copy pasted. Some terminology regarding, data minimization, data retention, purpose limitation, transparency, they're borrowed from GDPR. And so I think that both of those things together really highlight the importance of, understanding what's going on. Like, you need to understand what you're doing and being transparent about it. And I think that's a point of focus that I would anticipate. And then the other points of focus regarding CPRA, I am, staying tuned to see, but I think that it would be one thing that would be interesting to me to understand is how these concepts that are borrowed from GDPR are going to be applied in practice. One, generally, and two, given the fact that, they are kind of, it's like when you take those, cells from one place and you put them in, in the lab and something else and see how it grows, right? So these concepts in GDPR would be interesting to see how they develop against the, CPRA and the other law ecosystems, which are different, which have the concepts of sale, which have the, kind of historic kind of US approach.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting. But on more of a personal note, as we like to ask all of our guests, what is your best security tip?
For consumers or for companies?
We'll start with consumers.
That's really bad. That's really difficult to say because it's I would say that try to be mindful about what you're doing and understanding that in your quest and rush for convenience. Ooh, this looks cool. Oh, this looks nice. Oh, this is a good function. I was talking to my husband. I'm not going to name names, but he told me about some new product and explained what it does. And it's like, oh, it's really cool. I'm like, are you serious? Like, do you understand that it's going to be doing this and this and this? And it's like, yeah, but just when you tell it to him, I'm like, really? So I think, stopping and thinking about this, that's not the end all and be all, because we all err on the side of clicking I accept because I really need to do this now. But I think kind of stopping and being mindful about it maybe is the tip that I can give.
Well, thank you. Now, I very much appreciate your energy, and I can certainly see the passion when it comes to talking about privacy. When you're not talking about privacy, though, what do you like to do for fun?
So I have a kayak, and I kayak on the river near my house. And I do that while I am looking at, I really like, kind of waterfront and the water and being on the water. And I do that while listening to podcasts or audiobooks, both of which I really love. And I love the multitasking of it. And I also really like makeup. You're like, Sephora is like the happiest place that I can be at. And I could be, once my husband actually called me after 4 hours to see where I was, and I was getting to the checkout. And I like, face painting. So I do, different face painting things like superheroes and things with my kids. So I like doing that.
Super fun. My mom loves Sephora. And I'm sitting next to a fellow kayaker who would like more kayaking capabilities, but we don't have so many kayaking places here.
Indeed.
Well, Odia, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. If people would like to learn more or connect with you, where is a good place for them to do that?
Definitely on LinkedIn. I do a lot on LinkedIn. I'm happy to hear from people, and I post a lot of content if it's interesting to people on this topic. So LinkedIn, or my Fox Rothschild bio, it has my contact information.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you again for sharing all of this great information with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.